So when we're climbing those towers, we hope to be super safe when we're up there, but in the unlikely event someone does fall off a tower, they could be pretty beat up and maybe even unconscious. So that's why at the top of many of the lifts, we have what's called a cutaway kit. And this is what we would use to actually rescue someone if they were hanging from a tower, conscious or unconscious, and then we can lower them down to the ground. So these cutaway kits are located at Feck's Top, Castle Top, Scott's Top and Summit Top. And that way that there's always one close to whatever lift we're de-icing. And it's at the top, so then it should be easier to be brought down than bringing it up from the bottom. You'll also see that this one here has a tag on it. Now this tag means it's been checked and that it's been ready to use. So if you see one that is tagless, then make sure that we try and get this inspected. That way we know that 100% every time we grab these cutaway kits, they're ready to be used. So let's open this one up here. I might struggle opening this. Oh, there we go. So they are reasonably easy to break actually. So you can just break the tag. And we'll open this up and we'll go through a few of the parts inside. Every time they're packed away, they should basically be packed away so that they're ready to be used. So as soon as we pull this out of the bag, it should be in the best condition, ready to be used. So right on top here, we have all of our components. This is everything we need, then everything else that's in this bag is just rope. So it looks like a bit of a mess at first, but it actually makes a lot of sense. Right here, we have our knife, which we'll be using to cut our casualties' lanyards. I'm going to clip that just to the side of my harness. Now we have a few other pieces. This here is what we would actually use to connect ourselves to the casualty when we cut their lanyards. So I'm going to connect this nice and low down to my working line here. And then lastly, this is what we're actually going to use to rappel down the tower to get to our casualty. So this here is called a Petzl stop. We'll go through a little bit more about how this is going to work. And right at the very end, we have fig 8 and then a sling, which we'll use as our anchor point that we can connect to the tower. We use a sling instead of just maybe some hooks or something like that, because depending on where a person has fallen, they might not be in a place which is directly over an anchor. They actually might be going around maybe a chair or some sheaves or something like that. So we can actually rig this sling up onto any place on the crossbeam, and that way we can actually be really flexible with where we decide to go. So the easiest way to connect our sling to an anchor point is just to throw it around maybe the crossbeam or something like that on the tower and then connect it back onto itself. I'll show you that now. So let's pretend this here is our crossbeam of the lift tower. All I'm going to do is pass this over, making sure there's no rough edges on any side that could potentially cut our sling. And make sure that the stitch here is not right underneath my carabiner or on the anchor point here. I can then connect this fig 8 into our carabiner here, checking that this is locked up. And then finally, this part here, this Petzl stop, is going to be connected to my working point. And that's going to go right here. This is now set up and ready to use as if this casualty was unconscious. That way we can go down to them, we can cut their lanyards and lower them down to the ground. Maybe if they were conscious, then they could actually lower themselves down using this Petzl stop. So we can lower this down to them, connect it to themselves, and then they can lower themselves down to the ground. However, maybe it's more likely that someone would be unconscious. So we would throw the bag over, all the rope down, and then this device we would then use to lower ourselves down to the ground. So we climb over the catwalk. As you can see when I hang in my harness, I can pull this red lever here to lower myself to the ground. Okay, so you can see I'm now hanging in my harness on the Petzl stop here. But if you look closely, you can actually see that this is slipping through ever so slightly. Now, A cutaway is something that uses a lot of precision in terms of lowering down to our casualty. So a way to lock off our Petzl stop here is to cut a bight of rope on your tail and pass it through your carabiner, and then pass that bight up over the top of your Petzl stop. And that will stop locking off, or that will stop you from slipping down any further. If I pull this lever, I only go so far before it locks off. So I'm going to lower down to my casualty now, and once I've gotten to the height that I think will be okay, I'm going to lock off my device. And now I'm going to connect either one of these two to my casualty here. I'm going to try for the longer one first, because that way if I'm too close to my casualty, I can then use the shorter one as a backup. So I'll connect that. Maybe I'm still a little too high up, so I can just squeeze my trigger ever so slightly, go down a little further, and then there we go. So I'm now tethered to my casualty using this carabiner here, and now's the time for me to take their weight from their lanyards onto myself, and we're going to do that by cutting their lanyards with a knife here. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and be really careful with our knife, particularly in which rope we cut here. Definitely don't want to be cutting our own rope. So we're going to be using our lanyard, or our knife here. We're going to be cutting their lanyards away from us. That way, if we jolt at all, this sharp edge of the blade isn't coming towards us. We're also going to try and work around their lanyards. If we cut their lanyards bit by bit, that cut should open up and tear a little bit, therefore gradually putting their weight onto our equipment. If we cut it really quick, we could potentially shock load our whole working system, which could be really bad. So we're going to cut nice and slowly all the way through until it's completely done. Their weight is now completely on our system. I can finish up with the knife. And then keeping my hand on the brake rope the whole time, particularly as we now have a lot more weight on our system, and slowly lowering down to the ground. Okay, so when we're lowering down our casualty to the ground, you want to be really thinking about how long that they've actually been hanging there for. By checking in with each other on the radio, we should always be making sure that no one is left alone out there for too long. If you haven't heard anyone call in on a tower in a long time, then you should definitely be radioing them, trying to get in contact with them and make sure that that person's okay. If that hasn't happened though, and they've been hanging in their harness for quite a long time, or maybe an unknown amount of time, you want to be thinking about something called suspension trauma, which is something that can happen if we have our circulation cut off from parts of our body for too long. That can be from hanging in a harness and maybe blood not circulating around our body properly, and particularly with our legs and things like that. So as we're lowering that person down to the ground, you want to think about how quickly you ease off that pressure on any of their limbs that may be blocked. So it's always good to have a bunch of hands down the bottom helping you out, and maybe trying to keep them in that same position, that seated position. If you lie them down flat on their back, then that could cause that blood that is trapped in their legs to move quickly throughout their body, which can cause a lot of stress on the heart and things like that. So number one is to try and get that person down as quick as possible. But number two, when you are lowering that person down, try to have a few people to keep them seated when you lower them down onto that snow. Alright, so when the rescue's been completed, this kit needs to be repacked and checked to make sure that it's ready for the next rescue. Now, conducting a cutaway rescue can be quite a stressful thing, maybe even traumatic if it's one of your best friends hanging up there. So, if you don't feel comfortable doing this, then maybe it's time to palm this job off to one of the other competent people on the mountain that can do this for you. Well, maybe someone gives you a little bit of support. But if you're going to pack this away, what you need to do is flake this rope back into the bag so that when you throw it off the lift tower, it's going to unravel quite nicely with no knots or anything like that. Then you can see I've packed this up in a way that I have my anchor right on top, connected to my figure eight, and then everything that's going to go down with the rescuer is then connected to that Petzl stop. So you can't connect this to yourself without bringing everything else down with you. And I'm going to pack this in from the top. I'm putting my anchor in last. Therefore, this is the first thing that you can grab when you're ready for a rescue. Then before placing this back at the top of the lift, this is going to have to be re-tagged and dated as well.